All right, welcome back, everyone. So back here in my apartment. Um, that was the audio. I'm trying to figure out the right distance on this thing. Yeah, good seeing you all here. Um, so a few big stories today. I'm sure you all saw that Trump has pardoned Michael Flynn. It's a big deal, of course, when we look at the whole train of, say, scandals around these Trump-Russia investigations. Um, I want to go over tonight a few different things. I want to go in depth into this whole scandal around Flynn and what happened over the last 4 years of the Trump administration with these different types of scandals we've seen. Richard Fry, hello, good seeing y'all here. Let's see here. John H, yeah, thank you. Yeah, good to see y'all here. YT510, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, you all are great. Got your tea ready, Sarah? Yeah, I'm going back to kombucha for the night. So I have good old homemade kombucha for the night. All right. So I want to go over, explain a bit what happened with Flynn, looking back really at the nature of the scandals we've been seeing in this country, and really taking that to put into context what we're seeing right now with this election fraud, plain and simple. Also, I want to talk a bit about what's happening with the Trump legal cases in different states, especially when we're looking at, for example, Pennsylvania. Now, I have some very, very good interviews coming up. I think you can check out the one we just published tonight, for example, going into some of the color revolutions in the U.S. and how this stuff works. I have some really good ones coming up I think you'll like as well. Keep an eye out for them. All right, let's jump into them just now. Hey, Joe B, really appreciate it. Thank you. Now, let's jump into some of what's happening right now. A judge has blocked the certification of Pennsylvania's election results. Christine Cohen, thank you. Texas sweet tea, I love it. Yeah, so a judge has blocked the certification of Pennsylvania's election results. And I'm not sure if you all saw that Giuliani actually gave a very good presentation of the evidence they have there, noting, for example, looking at the ballots, it may be 600,000 or 6 million ballots possibly have issues with them there. There's some pretty serious stuff there. Yeah, I'll look into Patrick Byrne. Thanks for the heads up, Tweeter Trash. Thank you. Let me go over a bit of what's happening in Pennsylvania first. Now, I'll read an article from Epoch Times. I'll post the link in there for you all. One sec. If you read the chat, I'll have it in the link there. Now, a Pennsylvania judge on November 25th, today, ordered state officials to not certify the results of the 2020 election until her court holds a hearing on an election contest on November 22nd. So we're going to have a couple days to see what's actually happening with this. This is Commonwealth Judge Patricia McCollum. She ordered the state not to take any further steps to complete the certification of the presidential race, which the state announced on November 24th. She also blocked the certification of all other election results. Pretty serious move, right? Yeah, I'll get into a bit what's happening with Georgia as well. Yeah, there's some updates on Georgia as well, folks. But let me go into this a bit more. Now, she said this. This is the judge, of course. She said, to the extent that there remains any further action to perfect the certification of the results of the 2020 general election for the offices of President and Vice President of the United States of America, respondents are preliminarily enjoined from doing so, pending an evidentiary hearing to be held on Friday. And she said responders are preliminarily I'm terrible with these pronunciations. Preliminarily enjoined from certifying the remaining results of the election pending the evidentiary hearing. What she's saying? She's saying she's blocking the election results until they hear the evidence of the alleged fraud. Now she's presiding. This is McCollum. She's presiding over a lawsuit brought by Republican lawmakers and candidates against the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, against Democratic Governor Tom Wolf, against Secretary of State Kathleen Boockvar, and the Pennsylvania General Assembly. So a lot going on right now. Um, let's go a bit into the evidence they have there, because if you haven't watched the press conference they did, there was roughly 20 minutes. Giuliani spoke. It was very good. And they also brought out some of the different individuals who are, of course, making their allegations, and it's very good as well. All right, let's go into it now. Let's see here. Now, this is the article I'll be citing on this, so I'll post it in another Epoch Times story here. It says Philadelphia witnesses allege obstruction, other irregularities during counting of ballots. It says multiple witnesses testified to being obstructed from observing the counting of ballots and of other irregularities in Philadelphia during a public hearing by the state Senate Republican Policy Committee. And technically, they're allowed normally to observe the opening of these ballots. One point that Giuliani made, when you're dealing with mail-in ballots, and he noted, go back to 2012, go back to 2016, New York Times, other publications were talking about these exact same issues. These other publications were talking about these exact same issues, saying these are threats to our ability, threats to our ability to have accurate elections. These are open to fraud. Now they just flip the narrative around. They're just saying the opposite now. The problem you have when you get these mail-in ballots is as soon as you separate them from the envelope, the trail of evidence is lost. As soon as you separate them from the envelope, the trail of evidence is lost. And so when you have poll watchers go there, they're making sure that things line up. They're making sure that what's being said is what's being counted. They're making sure that the information lines up. They're making sure there's not votes being, say, put into the machines wrong, however they do it. Republicans were denied that access. They were not allowed to have that access. And as Giuliani mentioned, this wasn't just a Philadelphia thing, wasn't just a Pennsylvania thing. This is the same type of practice that went down in many other states that have become battleground states, and many other states where you've seen these weird irregularities. These irregularities where Trump was winning by quite a good margin, and just overnight it flips by a huge degree, like vertical change in favor of Biden, totally out of nowhere, doesn't make sense by any normal trajectory. And a lot of issues coming up with these. Now, it says poll observers Justin Queter and Kim Peterson, the first two witnesses at the Pennsylvania hearing, testified that they could not properly observe anything at the Philadelphia Convention Center. Queter, one of the individuals, said he was a certified observer on the day of the election and returned as a volunteer observer for the next 10 days, where he estimated he spent about 85 hours at the center. He said what he saw was, quote, problematic to say the least. And he said this: the Philadelphia Board of Elections processed hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots with zero civilian oversight or observation. And he also added, the Board of Elections erected a fence about 50 feet into the hall that ran the length of the room. All observers were corralled behind the fence. More than 100 board workers processed and opened mail-in ballots on the other side of the fence. Now, Queter also said the workers were arranged about 10 feet to more than 200 feet from us. He said the room was approximately 350 feet by 350 feet. In other words, you need to have like binoculars to see what the heck they're doing, to observe the details of what they're doing. This was not done in any legal way. This was absolutely illegal what they did, based on what was presented, at least by Giuliani. Now, again, adds this. Due to the distance of the workers from the erected fence, it was impossible for me or any observer to see what the workers were doing with any type of specificity. The observers were not able to challenge any decision or determination being made about the processing of these mail-in ballots. In other words, the normal process of transparent elections was violated, plain and simple. And this is one of many, many issues as well. Now, the second issue Queter said he found was these irregularities, again, was the board's duplication process. Now, as the days progressed, observers were informed that the board was going to be duplicating damaged mail-in ballots that could not be read by their scanners. He was told there would be more than 5,000 of these damaged ballots, and that the actual number was unknown and could be higher. Now, the process for counting these duplicated ballots involved two workers, one reading aloud what was marked on the damaged ballot, and the second worker using an ink highlighter to mark the choice on the blank ballot. The board's plan, he said, was to run the pink highlighted ballots through the scanners, and workers did this over a course of days. Now, on November 12th, the observers were informed that the pink highlighters could not be read by the scanner, and the board had to redo all of them. And he said this: the Board of Elections solution was to give the workers stacks of hundreds of what amounted to blank mail-in ballots. The workers individually were to fill in the corrected highlighted ovals with a dark pen, with no observation. Pretty serious stuff, right? Now, I'll go a bit further into this. I need to jump to the next part, actually. Now, this isn't just, again, in Pennsylvania. It's not just the mail-in ballots, for example, the observers not being given really accurate access. Actually, NTD News, and as I'm sure you know, a lot of you know, Crossroads, this channel, we also publish on NTD News. Giuliani, we actually had a video of him up there talking. He noted that they sent out, I think it was 1.8 million mail-in ballots. I had the number up, but it seems that Twitter may have pulled the video offline. I went to go find the video. It disappeared on us. I think Twitter might have pulled it down. But he had Giuliani saying, you had 1.8, I believe, mail-in ballots go out, and over 4 million came back. How did that happen? How is it that you have what appear to be, maybe 600,000 mail-in ballots appeared out of nowhere, something like that, somewhere in the areas of that? It's bizarre. So, some very, very strange thing happened in Pennsylvania. This was in addition to the other problems we mentioned recently. For example, evidence, for example, that people were registering and receiving mail-in ballots using PO boxes and mail addresses, and falsifying the data on that by, instead of saying PO box something something, they're saying apartment number 240 or something like that. Meaning somebody willfully, knowingly, and on a large scale committed fraud using that system. You have many, many strange issues like this, enough that the Philadelphia court, or the Pennsylvania court, has put a stop on these elections. No, they're not going to certify it. Now, another big thing happening. Let me put the link in here again for us. So Twitter. Folks, again, appreciate the donations. I'm sorry I can't get to every one of them coming in. Monster D, appreciate it. Wayne Bell, thank you. Really appreciate it. Eduardo C, thank you. Rocket Gardens, I really appreciate it. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Now, this is from Lynn Wood on Twitter. Thanksgiving Eve news. 11th Circuit granted my emergency motion for expedited review of lawsuit challenging validity of Georgia election procedure. We, the people, delivered a historic landslide win for real Donald Trump in Georgia and nationally. We, the people, will not allow it to be stolen. Now, keep in mind, you have two different directions on the legal challenges right now. There's the official Trump team, Giuliani, Trump, of course, his legal team. And then on the other side, you have the We, the People lawsuits. One from Trump team above, one from below, We, the People, going both directions with these lawsuits. On the We, the People side, you have Lynn Wood, and you have, name slipped my mind, Cindy Powell, I'm sorry. And so they have a big move here in Georgia now. They've made it so, again, they granted the emergency motion for expedited review of lawsuit challenging the validity of the election procedure in Georgia. That's a massive move. That's a very big move. Now, you might have all seen something else that happened. Michael Flynn has been pardoned by Trump. Michael Flynn has been pardoned by Trump. And you might remember the story of Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn was one of the first individuals hit with this whole Trump-Russia investigation. He was used as kind of the, one of the pivotal tools in manufacturing this whole thing. Long story short, you had this Steele dossier, which was ironically Russian disinformation, it turned out. Here's how it went down. Of course, it was unclear what was happening. Let's go back 4 years. What happened? You might remember there was all these government officials, news outlets, intelligence officials saying, I have seen evidence that Trump has been possibly compromised by the Russians. I've seen terrible things, horrible things involving prostitutes and weird things in Russia. We have significant evidence that Trump may be, involved with the Russians. There were claims like this going all around. And then what happened? There was this talk of this secret document that was going around that contained this intelligence briefing using this information. What happened? It went to BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed turns around and publishes the whole thing publicly. And when they publish the whole thing publicly, the thing just dies. And why is that? It's because it was nonsense. It's total disinformation. And then the story came out of how this story was created. This was now called the Steele dossier. And what happened with that? Well, the Democrat Party, right, the DNC, and the Clinton campaign hired a company to go and create this dossier. Michael Steele, the individual they hired to do this, was a former British spy. That in itself would be foreign disinformation paid for by a political party and a political campaign to damage the election process. And then what else? Now they're alleging Trump had ties to Russia and that this Russia interference in our election, and we need to stop Russia from interfering in our election. What happened? It just so happens, guess who Steele's main sources were? Russian assets, Russian individuals. Steele used Russian sources to create disinformation that damaged the entire, integrity of our presidential office and the integrity of an election for 4 years. That was Russian disinformation paid for, used to go after people. Among the people who was targeted was Michael Flynn. And he was criticized of having lied to the FBI during the process, just like we saw with Stone as well. Really, it should be in normal cases, this would be called fruit of the poison tree, where the reason for doing the investigation in the first place was shown to have problems with it. Whole thing gets thrown out normally, right? This was, of course, not handled that way. Now, I can tell you a bit of my own research into that. So again, tonight, I'm going back to kombucha tonight, homemade kombucha. All right. Now, going back to what happened with this, because, of course, I was working just as in investigative reporting at the time, 4.5 years ago now ish, when this whole thing was kind of unfolding. And it was interesting because I remember when they first released the documents during after it was actually 2016, when the transition had started to Trump. One thing that came out with that is the Obama administration was alleging that, there was Russian interference. There was the Russian breach of the Clinton servers, never proved. Turns out they hired this company, CrowdStrike, to go and look into it. Turns out the FBI never even looked at the server, never did any research themselves on it. Just took this company that was hired by the Clinton campaign to put this whole thing together. A bunch of nonsense. And then it turned out, too, the basis of their identifying, right? The identifying of these Russian quote-unquote agents, this fuzzy bear and thing they talked about, right? The code name they're using for it. That whole thing by CrowdStrike was also falsified. The basis for that was a study they did on Russia and Ukraine. It turned out they falsified some data on that, plain and simple, in order to frame these alleged threat actors that were tied to Russia. And what they do basically is they look at common traits of tools used, of methodologies and possible interests to try to attribute cyber attacks to different countries. They falsified that process to create this, fuzzy bear code name for the Russian assets. Falsified. They were exposed doing it. Now, what happened is the Obama administration then took that report and released this document alleging that this breach took place. And I actually was a cybersecurity reporter for several years. I was the technology editor at the Epoch Times for several years as well. At the time I followed the anonymous operations hacks. I followed the LulzSec hacks, followed Chinese Communist Party cyber attacks. I was writing about all kinds of things like this. And usually these cybersecurity companies will release big reports detailing how these cyber attacks went down. And, oftentimes I would read them because my job requires that, right? Now, there was something very interesting that happened when the Obama administration released this, analysis of what happened with this alleged Russia breach. which is, now they were alleging Russia did this attack, and they, media, all these different mainstream news outlets were reporting Russia hacked our elections. I actually read the document. There was nothing in there talking about a breach of our elections. There was nothing in there showing a breach took place. And they did it in a very, very, very deceptive manner. And for me, that set off some red alarms. The nature of the report they released was ridiculously deceptive. And when I read it, I was shocked to see that the government, under the Obama administration at the time, would release something so utterly misleading. Now, let me explain how this worked. They basically, the first half of the report was alleging Russia was carrying out these, disinformation operation. What was the basis of that? The document talked about, they bought some ads in social media. It wasn't that big of a deal. Then they said, Russia's RT, this Russia Today newspaper, was more so favoring Trump. And based on the fact that Russia Today has ties to the Russian government, they say, well, obviously Russia had interest in interfering with our elections. Look, you could say the same thing about BBC in the UK. Aren't they partly funded by the government? How many countries have medias that get money from the government? And what were the political views of those news outlets? Frankly, you could manufacture a scandal like that with just about any country that has any news outlet partly funded by the government. There's a lot of them. It was a ridiculous analysis, frankly. And then they got into the cyber attack part of it. And now, normally, if you're reading a document talking about cyber attacks launched, they have really complex breakdowns of the analysis of what happened, how it went down. This document, instead of providing analysis of a breach that took place, it had a complex explanation of how cyber attacks work in general. There was no allegation that a cyber attack took place in that. There was no evidence a cyber attack took place. There was no analysis of a breach, nothing. It was basically a complex analysis of how cyber attacks work. And so, in other words, people who don't follow cybersecurity, you'd read that and you'd be like, wow, this looks really complex. They must have a lot of evidence. And you'd be like, okay, government report from our intelligence agencies, they know what they're doing. It looked impressive on paper, but if you know what it actually said, it didn't tell you anything. And that type of deception to me was what set off a lot of the investigations at the Epoch Times, where we said maybe there's something more to this. And sure enough, we looked into the entire scandal, broke it down, and we found the entire Trump-Russia investigation could not hold water. The thing had been falsified. Not only that, but people involved with it may have committed crimes themselves. In other words, it was not the Trump team that committed the crimes. It was very likely the Obama administration, intelligence officials, people in the FBI and our intelligence agencies who really misled the entire country, threw this country into chaos for 4+ years, and really dragged a president and his administration through the mud using false information. Now, if you understand the context of that, and you look at what's happening right now in the U.S. with this election fraud, with what's happening with the media behaving the way they are, with social media censoring the way they are, you can see that what we have happening right now appears to be the culmination of an ongoing scandal. This is an ongoing scandal. And we're seeing now they pull at every stop, and this is the culmination of that scandal. Let me explain it. Now, for this, I'm going to go over an infographic the Epoch Times put together looking at this 4-year-long campaign against Trump. I just posted it on the chat. You all can read it. Now, let me read it to you, right? It says, efforts to undermine the president haven't stopped since 2016. The post-election push to pressure President Donald Trump to concede, despite numerous credible allegations of voter fraud and ongoing legal challenges, is not an isolated incident. It is the culmination of a 4-year-long campaign against him, which started during his first run for president in 2016, when the FBI launched a politically motivated investigation of his campaign. During his subsequent 4 years in office, there have been consistent efforts to remove him from office, first through Russia collusion narrative, then through impeachment. The Epoch Times has here provided an overview of some of the main efforts made against the sitting president of the United States. This is an issue that transcends party lines. as it is not only an assault on Trump, but an assault on the office of the presidency, and with it, an assault on the foundation of America. Let me go over some of these points with you. Appreciate it, Carly. Really, everyone. Wow, appreciate it. Thank you. George James, thank you. Appreciate it. And Eduardo C., thank you. Greetings from Napa Valley, California. Thank you. Yeah, from San Diego originally, actually. Let's go over some of this now. Because if you understand this, it puts this whole Flynn issue into context. Flynn was one of the victims of this, frankly. Let's go over this. 1, politically motivated investigation. The FBI under the Obama administration in 2016 launched a politically motivated investigation of the Trump campaign based on publicly available information. We know the investigation was initiated based on the thinnest of evidence. Remarks made by a junior Trump campaign advisor to the Australian ambassador in London. In reality, the investigation primarily relied on the discredited Steele dossier, produced by former MI6 agent Christopher Steele on behalf of the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. Now, there was also the Trump-Russia shadow. While the FBI's Crossfire hurricane investigation itself would not find any evidence of Trump-Russia collusion, the ongoing investigation, including selective leaks by the media, would create the public narrative that Trump had colluded with Russia to win the 2016 election. There are still people who believe this, even though no evidence was ever shown, no evidence was ever proven. Now, this cast a shadow over the first few years of his presidency and constrained his actions, both domestically and internationally. Some members of Congress had gone so far as to call for Trump's impeachment over the false allegations. Now, there was also the FBI under Comey and McCabe. The FBI director, right? The FBI under Director James Comey and Deputy Director Andrew McCabe proactively worked against Trump. Intelligence agencies weaponized against the President of the United States, using, again, false information. McCabe was directly involved in the Crossfire hurricane investigation. The Crossfire hurricane investigation was, again, this Trump-Russia investigation. Working with FBI agent Peter Strzok and an FBI attorney Lisa Page. The two individuals were having an affair with each other. Now, after Comey was fired by Trump in May 2017, McCabe actively pushed the agency to further investigate Trump. McCabe's FBI went as far as suggesting Department of Justice official Bruce Orr reach back out to Steele, the MI6 agent, despite many of his claims in his dossier had already been disproven by that time, and the FBI had cut ties with him over his leaks to the media. The news outlets in this country, the mainstream media, is the next big piece of this. Perhaps one of the biggest, most powerful forces working against Trump during his presidency has been the news media. Over the past 5 years, they have relentlessly published skewed and inaccurate information about Trump while minimizing or ignoring his accomplishments, seeking to portray him publicly as an illegitimate president. This type of reporting has created a climate of anger, hate, and instability in America. They are lying to people, they're filling people with hatred, and they're turning people against each other using lies, slander, and false information. It has resulted in threats made to the president's life and acts of violence against his supporters. Impeachment. The House of Representatives on December 18th, 2019, impeached Trump along partisan lines. Now, though the Senate would later dismiss the charge that left a mark on his presidency and drag the country through months of public attacks in the media. And the center, right, of the impeachment was a phone call Trump had made on July 25th, 2019 to the Ukrainian president, during which Trump expressed his hope that allegations of potential corruption involving former Vice President Joe Biden would be investigated. Now, given even the publicly available information at the time, there were legitimate concerns that American political influence and taxpayers' funds were misused in Ukraine. At the time, it was publicly known that Biden's son, Hunter Biden, had received tens of thousands of dollars a month from a Ukrainian energy giant, while then Vice President Biden, in his own words, had pressured the Ukrainian president to fire a prosecutor as a prerequisite for receiving $1 billion in foreign aid. That same prosecutor had been investigating the Ukrainian energy company Burisma, as well as its board, which included Hunter Biden. That's what the context of that was. Now, the next part's the CCP virus, this new coronavirus. Trump's opponents have accused the president of mishandling the CCP virus, again, the novel coronavirus, and of acting too late, right? Now, this, however, is contrary to the early events in 2020. The Trump administration on February 2nd, 2020, banned all foreign travel from China, the source of the virus. This decision was made by the president against the advice of some of his top advisors and exceeded actions taken by most other nations at that time. Meanwhile, his opponents in politics and media described Trump's move as xenophobic and an overreaction. Remember, these same people saying Trump didn't do enough were accusing him of overreacting at that time. They play on people's loss of memory. They play on the public's inability to remember, which scandals played out and to remember, what actually happened. That they were playing on that. They were hypocritical. Now, in hindsight, the decision proved immensely valuable in helping to slow the spread of the virus. Trump's move. The Trump administration increased testing capacity, coordinated with state governments to provide them with federal assistance they needed, used the Defense Production Act to compel companies to produce critical health equipment, such as ventilators. And that was at the time, too, when the Chinese Communist Party was using this health diplomacy, this mask diplomacy, where they were nationalizing companies, U.S. companies, for example, in China, that manufacture these masks to restrict the sale of these around the world. Trump used this military act, this Defense Production Act, to make companies produce them for the U.S., to make sure we had equipment, again, such as ventilators, and also provided billions in federal funding and eased federal regulations for major drug companies to push for the development of a vaccine. This vaccine coming out has been rushed, and it's because Trump cleared the way for that to happen. Wow, Steve Carpenter, really, really appreciate it. Thank you. And Jimmy Ling, thank you also. Let me go through the analysis and I'll jump more into some of the questions for the night. Anyways, next big part of this would be foreign interference. Now, it'd be accurate to say that Trump is communist China's biggest adversary. The president broke a decades-long U.S. policy towards China that was based on the belief that, through engagement and economic development, the CCP would evolve from a totalitarian regime towards a more democratic country. In reality, this strategy of appeasement merely resulted in trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of U.S. jobs going to China. The Chinese Communist Party only became more hostile to the United States during that time. Again, and what happened with China? Instead of becoming more democratic and more open, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, used this wealth to advance its dictatorship, creating the most technologically advanced tyranny the world has ever witnessed. Now, the CCP has consistently worked against Trump during his presidency, both publicly and behind the scenes. Beijing has used its domestic and overseas propaganda channels, often by relying on the United States' own media, to vilify Trump, going as far as to suggest that the outbreak of the CCP virus in Wuhan was because of the American military. Next up, we have Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, BLM, has been behind the riots that have plagued America's cities for much of this year. The group was hijacked, right? They hijacked the concerns of people over racism and used them to justify its advance of a Marxist agenda. In a 2015 video, the BLM co-founder, this Coolers, described herself and her fellow founders as, quote, trained Marxists. Just like in Russia, China, Cuba, and Venezuela, trained Marxists have hijacked righteous causes to advance the communist agenda. Many of those who lived through the Cultural Revolution in China in the 1960s have commented that the riots in the United States over the summer, which included the toppling of historical statues, was eerily similar. Same thing happened in China. Same thing happened in other countries that moved towards communist systems. The result is a climate of chaos and insecurity that affects the entire country. And frankly, if you were to ask me, BLM's moves have created more racial tensions than there were before. Remember, this whole race agenda, that was Obama. That was Obama administration. That added fuel to the fire and brought back racism. They were trying to make it so you had to, discriminate. You had to look at people's color of their skin. You have schools now using these narratives, wanting to bring back segregation. These are alleged anti-racist, movements that are really just manufacturing racism, trying to bring back segregation and creating racial tensions. Their entire foundation is racism. It's turning people against each other based on race. And even to justify their actions, even to justify the idea that what they're doing isn't racist, right? Even to try to justify this, they had to redefine racism, where it's no longer just, judging, hating a person by the color of their skin. They made it so it's not racist to hate white people, even though that is racist by definition. Even though by the normal definition of racism, that is absolutely racist. These are racists claiming that they're fighting racism. That's what's happening. And frankly, they threw this country into chaos, insecurity, racial tensions, you name it. Next up, we have Antifa, dressed in full black gear, including armor, helmets, and masks, and trained in agitation and basic combat. Antifa extremists have been involved in numerous acts of violence during Trump's presidency. In many cases, these acts of violence, which include the use of weapons, rocks, Molotov cocktails, other things, were directed at law enforcement and government property. But Antifa members have also directly targeted unarmed common citizens for simply supporting Trump. Again, these are like Nazi brown shirts. These are like Mussolini fascist black shirts. It's the exact same thing, right? Now, we saw this happen twice in Washington, where those who had gathered to support Trump were later attacked when alone in the city at night. Antifa's use of a militia-style force to intimidate and physically attack citizens for their political beliefs creates a powerful climate of fear and stands against the most basic American values. Now, normally, what do you call it? What do you call it normally? If you carry out violence to achieve a political goal, if you carry out acts of violence for political suppression, what is the name of what that is? That's terrorism. That's what terrorism is. To carry out acts of violence for the purpose, right? For the purpose of political suppression, to achieve a political goal, that is terrorism. And frankly, they've enacted this terrorist movement supported by, big leftist organizations funding them, direct support by some of the big media, direct support by many politicians, DAs, you name it, people letting them off the hook. Oh, wow, Ramona Hastel, I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. And good mother as well. Thank you. And happy Thanksgiving, almost everyone as well. I always appreciate the support, folks. Really, thank you all. Cognition Design, thank you also. Maximum, good to see you back. Thank you also. Let's go deeper into this. Let's go even deeper into this. Next up is the permanent government. Some people call it the deep state. Now, though Trump as president is a leader of the executive branch, when he came to office, he inherited a federal government staffed with hundreds of thousands of employees. It's no secret that many career officials in the U.S. government have actively sought to undermine or even openly work against Trump. Many in government have been led by false information published by media organizations to believe they are doing the right thing, and that by working against Trump, they are putting the interests of the country first. In fact, they have done the country a disservice by blocking a rightfully elected president from executing the will of the people. Again, you could argue that maybe they have their own political views. You could argue that they were misinformed by the lying, these misleading, false articles published by a lot of the mainstream press. Whichever way, they halted the ability of Trump to carry out a lot of his policies. And of course, the Trump-Russia collusion scandal was one big piece of that. The intelligence community, FBI, CIA, was involved with that. And we know that based on the reports even during the end of the Obama administration. Hey, W.M. Hannah, thank you for the donation. Trump, a great fighter. What did she say? Trump, a great fighter for freedom and values. He will crush down those election criminals. We'll have to see. It does seem, if you watch the press conference Giuliani gave today, it's pretty hard hitting it. If you haven't watched it, I highly recommend watching it. I would put up the link. Actually, I had one ready. NTD News, which of course Crossroads is part of NTD. We broadcasted NTD. They had a great tweet up with a clip of this. It seems it disappeared off Twitter. Don't know what happened to it. The link is gone, disappeared off Twitter. But you can find the video still. Giuliani gave a very good presentation of the problems you're seeing in a lot of states, mainly focused, at least on this one, on Pennsylvania. Now, next up, let's go deeper into this. What else have we seen? The Mueller special counsel investigation. Remember the special counsel? Remember it's Mueller time? Remember that meme going around? Now, following the firing of FBI Director Comey, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein assigned former FBI Director Robert Mueller to continue the FBI's investigation of alleged Trump-Russia collusion. Again, this disinformation campaign launched, dragging America through the mud for over 4 years. Now, going deeper into this, right? Mueller would conclude in a final report there was no evidence of such collusion. But this only came after a nearly 2-year-long investigation, giving the media and Trump's political opponents leeway to portray Trump as an illegitimate president because of his supposed affiliation with Russia. In other words, this dragged on these lies for an extra 2 years. And this gave lies and disinformation room to, room to try to discredit Trump's presidency, used for over 2 years by the media and by big politics. Lying to the American people. Again, 4 years, 2 years under Mueller. That was among, again, many things that happened. Let's go deeper into this. The illegal leaks. Throughout the past 4 years, the Trump administration has been plagued by selective leaks aimed at damaging Trump's presidency. Some of these leaks have been criminal in nature, such as a leak of transcripts of Trump's conversations with foreign leaders, a felony offense. Treasury official Natalie Edwards was found guilty of illegally leaking suspicious activity reports on financial transactions by former Trump campaign associate Paul Manafort, among others. And of course, bringing it to now, 2020 election fraud. 2020 election fraud. Now, following the November 3rd elections, dozens of credible allegations of voter fraud or other illegal acts connected to the counting of ballots have emerged. Dozens of poll watchers across multiple states have given testimony and sworn statements under penalty of perjury, meaning they can be charged if they lied on it, detailing irregularities and how ballots were counted, as well as how the workers were instructed to make otherwise illegal changes to ballots, how they were unable to properly observe ballot counting, and how they witnessed new ballots mysteriously appear out of nowhere. The Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee launched a number of lawsuits to challenge the process. They've argued that in Pennsylvania alone, 600,000 ballots should be invalidated, as Republican election observers were not allowed to witness the ballot processing. And also we have manufactured narratives, another big one, right? The use of manufactured narratives to attack Trump has been pervasive since he assumed office. Perhaps the most notable is the claim that he defended neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, Virginia, when in fact he said that there were, quote, very fine people on both sides. Might have heard that quote over and over again. What is he referring to? He was referring to people who were, quote, were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. In other words, Trump specifically added, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists because they should be condemned totally. Trump said, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists because they should be condemned totally. This lie was repeated in paid ads by the Biden administration. This lie, saying that Trump said otherwise, was repeated during the presidential debates. This lie has been repeated by the big media over and over again. When Trump said again, I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists. Yet despite this, again, despite this being on public record, despite you still being able to watch videos of this, right? Trump would continue to be asked throughout his presidency, especially during the election season, whether he was ready to, quote, denounce white supremacy, despite having done so on many occasions, even before becoming president. So hopefully this puts into context what we're seeing now with these elections. This is, again, the continuation of scandal after scandal after scandal and lie after lie after lie being paraded in front of the American people. This is our government not hesitate, politicians not hesitating to lie to their constituents. This is media not hesitating to lie to their readers. And why are they doing this? It's to achieve a political goal they want to achieve. They have demonstrated for the past 4 years that they're willing to lie to you. They've demonstrated the last 4 years that they're willing to manufacture false scandals, that they're willing to drag people through the mud, destroy families, destroy lives, create divisive narratives, turn people against each other, and sow discord across this country to achieve political goals. What we're seeing right now is nothing more than the continuation of that. Now, folks, that said, let's jump into some of the questions for tonight. Let's see here. This is from Missy French. Josh, what do you think of the report regarding Governor Kemp in Georgia and Newsom in California being bought off by the CCP? Wouldn't surprise me. I haven't seen evidence of them being bought off, but honestly, it would surprise me. Again, a lot of my work going back to 2008 was investigating Chinese Communist Party operations like this, including involvement in U.S. elections, mainly in New York local elections. Absolutely would not surprise me. The Chinese Communist Party's they have military branches dedicated to stuff like this. General Political Department, Liaison Department, under the government side, United Front Work Department, dedicated to operations like this. Wouldn't surprise me in the least if a lot of government officials, not to mention, for example, business leaders, journalists, academics, a lot of this has actually been exposed. A lot of them are in the pockets of the CCP. Not to mention how many of them have financial interest tied to this as well. Curious too. Let's see. Josh, thank you for the donation also. Josh, please stop wearing purple ties. It gives off the wrong impression. Love from Greenville, Illinois. Godspeed, Patriot. Yeah, I like my purple ties. Okay, fine. I know that I think Soros was using the purple ties as a message back in 2016. So if you all think the purple ties send the wrong message, I don't mind not wearing them. Maximoon 707, thank you for the donation also. Let's see here. And this is from Americus Domesticus. Will NATO or CCP or UN try to come here to help the new administration oust the former? Now, would Biden ever bring in NATO or the Chinese Communist Party or the UN? You know, it's speculation. It's speculation. Hey, a lot of people like the purple. Yeah, I hope you know I'm not working for color revolution stuff, right? In fact, you can watch the interview I just published with the guy who exposed the color revolutions. Check it out. We just published it tonight, actually. This is pure speculation. If the U.S. government were to ever bring in NATO peacekeepers, forces like Interpol and so on, it was actually proposed at one time during the Obama administration. It was actually proposed, and it has been proposed by government officials. One of the main reasons they propose it is because, for example, right now with the COVID lockdowns, CCP virus lockdowns, you have police who are sworn to protect the Constitution, not a political party. You have police sworn to protect the Constitution, refusing to enforce laws that violate the Constitution. Police in this country will not enforce laws that violate the Constitution, especially sheriff's offices. And so it's very difficult for governments to pass laws that violate the Constitution because police won't enforce them. The only way they could enforce laws that violate the Constitution would be to bring in a foreign peacekeeping force, probably, because even the military would not support it in the US. If you wanted to have a gun grab, I guarantee you a lot of police would not enforce it. In fact, you had sheriff's offices during the Obama administration coming out and stating publicly they would not enforce laws like that. And so if so let's say a government office came in and they wanted to do a gun grab, if they wanted to push for things that violate the Constitution, they could only really do that by bringing in NATO or the UN or the CCP. Plain and simple. Would they do that? Hard to say. It has been proposed. Has been proposed. Maximoon 707. Thank you for the donation. Really, yeah, always appreciate it. Thank you. Coke Machine. What about martial law? Is it the final trump card? Remember, Trump did, I repeat it often, Trump did pass an executive order and declared a national emergency back in 2018 around election fraud. Could Trump declare martial law based on that? From what I understand, if we're in a state of emergency, he would have powers along those lines. Would he do it? Maybe. He might. To be honest, I wouldn't put anything beyond Trump. I was actually talking to a guy today about poker. I had a friend back in the day who was into poker. And when you're talking about poker, you're watching a person's face and you're trying to anticipate their moves. When you're working on, for example, analysis, I do a lot of analysis on this show. There's normal analysis, there's predictive analysis, so on, right? Normally what you do with analysis is you try to understand the way that things normally work, and then you look for anomalies based in functions. So you can, if you look at a pattern of operations and there's an anomaly in it, you might see something that deserves further investigation. It's usually easy to predict the actions of bureaucracies, government, military, businesses, because they usually have standard ways of operating. You can kind of predict how they'll react to things. So normal analysis oftentimes is based on this predictive analysis based on normal functions and so on. But it gets a bit more complicated when you're dealing with what you would talk about, for example, in poker as the maniac, the person who does not follow any kind of normal way of operating. For example, Trump, it's not a nice sounding word, but in poker, you'd call him a maniac, meaning he's totally unpredictable. He'll do things you would never expect. I was actually talking as well with old Cold Warrior military intelligence guy not too long ago, and he was talking. We were joking, talking about international militaries, and he was saying actually a lot of the intelligence reports they were getting out of the Soviet Union during the Cold War and so on, they couldn't stand the American military because they said they couldn't predict the American military. They said that it seemed that the American soldiers don't even follow their own plans. That they write down their plans and ways of doing things, but when they go into operation, they take it. They come out of left field, things they never expected. They're unpredictable. Trump is the same way. He's unpredictable. Trump, there's a lot of stuff he might do that I wouldn't put beyond him, that I would not think would normally be done. Hey, folks, really appreciate the donations. Again, thank you. This is from Bill Favot. Josh, do you think this whole COVID-19 was developed to impact the U.S. economy and therefore create an excuse to hammer down Trump administration and also to make the election fraud look legitimate? Personally, I don't think the document, I don't think the CCP virus was developed or released or whatever for that reason. At least the way that's unfolded. I do think it has been used that way, though. I do think governments, local governments in the U.S., they have definitely used it for political goals. They have definitely politicized it, which is really unfortunate. Another big piece of this, too, is that they're using the CCP model for dealing with the virus. The lockdowns, the mask mandates, these are the Chinese Communist Party's models for dealing with it. And the Chinese Communist Party in China, I was reporting on it. You might remember when we had lockdowns here in New York, I was working from home for a long time. What the Chinese Communist Party was doing in China was not working. It was a failing strategy. The thing was, is they were lying to the world about it, even though internal reports were showing otherwise, which I was reporting on. I was showing what was happening, outside the external reports. Internal reports showed the real situation. What they were doing was not working. They were lying to the world. The World Health Organization was lying to the world on their behalf. Many governments in the world, many media in the US were repeating their lies, and frankly, failed systems of dealing with this virus were taking as the main method of dealing with it. And it seems that government officials here, willingly or unwillingly, I think willingly, have politicized it. They used it as an excuse to change election laws. They've used it as an excuse for political suppression with public gatherings, for example, for protests. They've used it as an excuse to make it so that ballot watchers can't observe the counting of ballots. They have, without a doubt, weaponized, militarized, and politicized this virus for their own political gain. Absolutely, this has happened. This is not to say the virus itself is not real, because I think it is real, even though I do think it hasn't hit the US nearly as hard as it did China. Wow, folks, really appreciate the donations also. Let's see here. This is from, let me see. It's from Michael Cook. Thank you. Very impressive analysis. Appreciate it. Thank you. Cataline Fordis. What do you think the MSM will entertain as the new fake news if Trump does actually end up conceding? God willing, he doesn't. I think if Trump does concede, we're going to hear a lot of talk about, time to heal. It's time for peace. One thing you have with, say, subversion and demoralization movements. If you haven't watched this video, for example, with Yuri Bezmenov, I highly recommend watching it. This Soviet dictator Yuri Bezmenov. You can type it into YouTube, YURIBEZMENOV. He also wrote a book called Love Letter to America. He wrote it under his pseudonym, which was Thomas Scholman. I highly recommend reading it. You can find public versions of it. He details the 4 stages of subversion, being demoralization, demoralization, destabilization, conflict, normalization, meaning that you demoralize a society, you destroy people's faith in the system, you make things stop functioning, you create open conflict in society, and then from the state of open conflict, right? From the state of open conflict, you can bring in a new power to restore order, to create a time to heal. And at that time, once you've created the system you want to create, once the system you want to have in power is in power, you no longer need the forces of destabilization. You no longer want protests on the streets. You no longer want these calls for action, protest, and violence. And not only that, very oftentimes the groups that were used for those types of actions are going to be persecuted. They're going to be prosecuted, thrown in jail, because they're the first to rally against the new system once they see it not being what they wanted. That's why Lenin called them useful idiots. They're used for a purpose. Once they no longer need them, they're the first ones to get purged. I think the mainstream media are going to have their fake news thing. I think they're still going to go after anyone trying to say anything outside the political narratives. Probably me, but we'll have to see how it goes. This is from Ed. Do you guys have a documentary on the real history of communism in China / worldwide? Yes, we do. Epoch Times did 2 of them. We did one many years back called 9 Commentaries on the Communist Party. It's a free book. Go to 9commentaries.com. It's a free book. We also did a full documentary with NTD on it, which is very good. I highly recommend it. 9 Commentaries on the Communist Party. That book actually started a movement in China called the Tuidong movement, where people started voluntarily and peacefully withdrawing their membership from the Chinese Communist Party. Gets almost no coverage in the big media. In fact, let me pull it up. You go to tuidong.org. I'll put the link in. Put it in right here. As we're speaking right now, Chinese people who have withdrawn their membership from the Chinese Communist Party, the Young Pioneers, and the Youth League. 368,204,050 people in China have withdrawn their membership of the CCP, the Young Pioneers, and the Youth League, and that was sparred by that book and that documentary. Huge impact. We actually did the same documentary, same type for the United States as well. And that's called The Specter of Communism is Ruling Our World. You can watch our documentary on that, and you can also read the book that we published on that. The Specter of Communism is Ruling Our World. That's the new one we published about communism, not just in the United States, but around the world. I highly recommend reading it if you haven't. You can find it on the Epoch Times website. We have it for sale in the Epoch Times store. Highly recommend it. And folks, I've been going an hour now, and I just got back to New York, and so I need to take a minute to rest tonight and get back into things again. Always, folks, I really appreciate the donations, really appreciate the support. Always enjoy doing these Q&As as well. So tomorrow's Thanksgiving for those of us in the U.S. So I will not be doing a live Q&A tomorrow, but we will be publishing a very big interview. One which I think you will all very much enjoy. We have some pretty big allegations, proven allegations coming out with that. Highly recommend watching it. Of course, don't, enjoy your Thanksgivings, of course. But we're going to have a good video tomorrow night. I will not be doing a live Q&A, but we will have a good video. And Friday, of course, I'll be back into it. And I'm going to keep trying to do these live Q&As. I may not do one on Saturday, but I'll be back on Sunday again as well. Now, folks, as always, really appreciate the support. You're all great. If you want to support this channel also, please consider sharing these videos, especially the interviews we do. It seems a lot of our movement right now is more organic. So if you want to help us grow, please share this video. It really helps us. And that said, folks, happy Thanksgiving. Please take care of yourselves. As always, stay informed and stay free. Thank you.